Hi there, my name's Robin Ward. You might know me as eviltrout online. I have this blog at eviltrout.com, and I write a lot about Ember.js. I'm also a co-founder of Discourse, which is open source forum software that's also written in Ember.js. One of my most popular blog entries is this one called Ember without Ember Data. And I think it's popular because a lot of beginners aren't always fully aware that when you get started with the Ember.js framework, you don't have to learn the persistence framework at the same time. In fact, you can create really sophisticated applications without using Ember Data, and it's not even that hard. So I just wanted to do a little tutorial that shows how to get started in building a web application in Ember.js without using Ember Data, and then building up to some of the more advanced concepts. So I'm going to assume that you know the basics of Ember, although I'll try to do my best to remind you of how something's working along the way. But if you get lost, just go to the Ember.js website, read the documentation. It's excellent, and you can feel free to pause the video and unpause and whatever suits you. So the first thing I want you to do is make sure that you've installed Node.js and npm, and then make sure that you've installed the Ember CLI tools. I'll provide a link to that at the bottom. Once you've done that, go to your working directory and type ember new ember reddit. So Ember Reddit is going to be a small read-only version of the popular website Reddit, and it's going to use their JSON API, and I'm going to show you just how easy it is to drop that in. Okay, once it's done, change into the Ember Reddit directory, and if you type Ember server, and then you'll get this little URL here, and if you paste it in, you should see welcome to Ember.js. So that's pretty awesome. Ember CLI is what's backing this whole thing. It provides a basic project structure and a server, and it uses Joe Liss's excellent Broccoli library to wire up all your assets and stuff like that. So it's really cool. But the first thing I want to do is make it look a little less crufty. It's just using like no styling right now. So I'm going to use the Bootstrap library, which I think is a great way to get started in any project. So the way we're going to install this is by typing bower install save bootstrap. That's with 2 dashes in front of save. So Bower is a front-end package library, management library, and it's really cool, and many CSS and JavaScript projects are supported, so check it out and see if your favorite thing is in there. So one thing that's just a little more difficult than it needs to be is once you've installed a package using Bower, you then have to tell Broccoli to include it as a vendored JS thing. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to edit broccfile.js, and we're going to say app.import vendor bootstrap dist css bootstrap.css. And that's going to tell Broccoli that we want this file concatenated into our vendor CSS file. You'll see the line above there includes Ember Data, and we don't. The whole point of this screencast is not use Ember Data, so let's just go ahead and remove that. Once we've done that, open up the file index.html that's in the app directory, and just before this, the Ember Reddit CSS is included, also include the vendor.css. So that's going to be the one that Broccoli concatenates. Now if we type Ember server again, and we refresh our web browser, aha, it now looks a lot better. I'm going to even go a step further, and I'm going to open up app.css, and by default Ember CLI includes a 20 pixel margin, and I'm just going to go ahead and remove that and hit save. And the awesome thing is you might have just noticed that when I saved, it automatically reloaded in my browser, and that's because Ember CLI uses live reload, and it watches for when you make changes to files and it reloads. Now to get started, I'm going to open up the file application.hbs. And you can see that it's in the app templates directory. And this has our basic welcome to ember.js. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to drop in a little boilerplate HTML. And this is specific to Bootstrap's formatting. It looks like I've missed a div tag, so I'm just going to add that in. And it's going to give us a little header here that says Ember Reddit. The next thing I want to do is I want to be able to view a subreddit. So the way we do that in Ember is we declare we think of URLs first. And the URL I want is going to be something like r/aw, where aw is the subreddit that I want to view. So open router.js, and that's in the app directory. You'll see there's this router.map, which takes a function here. And I'm going to type this.resource subreddit, and then I'm going to say path/r/subreddit ID with a colon in front of it. And what this is going to tell Ember is that if the path r/something, in this case the name of the subreddit, is requested, it's going to go to the subreddit resource. The next step is to create a new file in the routes directory. So I'm going to call this file subreddit.js. And this file is going to contain a class that responds to this URL and fetches the data that Ember needs to display its template. So I do that by typing export default ember.route.extend. I'm going to create a function here called model. That's going to take params. And then just for now, it's just going to return an empty object. Maybe I'll just say, actually, ID is params.subreddit ID. Okay, now let me just explain what's going on here. If you're not familiar with this export default syntax, this is the new ES6 module syntax, the way that you export things from the file that you're working on. So in this case, Ember is smart enough, or Ember CLI, I should say, is smart enough to know that the subreddit file exports one thing. It exports a default module, which is an Ember route. So when you go to the subreddit path, or /r in our case, it's going to open up this file, and the first thing it's going to do is it's going to call this model hook, and it's going to pass the params. And in this case, the params is going to include subreddit ID. So I'm just doing a really simple model hook here, which just returns a dummy object with an ID thing. I might also just for fun, just say hello world as an attribute. So our app still doesn't do much, and that's because there's no template. There's no way to display the subreddit. So I'm going to open up in the templates directory. I'm going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call it subreddit.hbs for handlebars. Get used to me creating files called subreddit. You'll see that due to Ember's conventions, that everything that was within a resource and model and all that stuff will end up with the same name. This is great because it really makes it easy for you to just think of what things are called. So in this file, I'm just going to say, just close this. So in this new template, I'm going to create a header, and I'm just going to put the ID in it. And for fun, I'm going to say hello. Now, if in my browser, if I go to the RA path, so you can see here that I've outputted the ID in a header tag, and then below it, I've just had my dummy hello world thing. The next thing I want to do is make this a little more exciting by fetching data from a server. So I'm going to create a class that I'm going to call an adapter. And this adapter is going to reach out to the Reddit server, and it's going to ask them for JSON. So I'm going to create a new file. Actually, I'm going to create a new directory, and I'm going to call the directory adapters. Inside adapter, I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be called subreddit. Again, I'm going to say export default ember.object.extend in this case. Okay, so ember.object.extend means that I'm creating a new class definition, or you could consider it perhaps a prototype. So if another module includes this, it can call create on it, and then it can call the methods, as we'll see in a second. So I'm going to declare a function here called find, and it's going to take two parameters. One is a name, and one is an ID. So the name in this case is going to be subreddit for the most part, because this adapter is specific to the subreddit, and ID is going to be something like aw. A good question is, why does it need the name if we already know that the adapter is the subreddit adapter? Well, the reason is because it's to encourage code reuse and stuff in the future. I think it'll be a little more obvious later on. So this method is going to be making an Ajax call. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to import a library here. And this is called IC Ajax. It's made from the awesome guys at Instructure. And it's essentially a wrapper around jQuery's Ajax stuff. And it gives you a more familiar API, and it's designed to work well with Ember. So I'm just going to say that little line there to import the library. And then I'm going to say return Ajax http www.reddit.com r, because they're using the same path as us. And then I'm going to say ID, and then .json. I hit save, and my JavaScript errors go away. This is very simple, right? Like if you've ever used jQuery.ajax, it's roughly the same idea. It's roughly the same API, and Reddit makes it really easy to just grab, a subreddit's details. So of course that's not hooked up to anything. So let's go to our subreddit route and make sure that this adapter method is called. So let's go to subreddit. Instead of this, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say import subreddit adapter from Ember Reddit adapters subreddit. If you recall, it's basically the path of the file that we just created. And then here I'm going to say, I'm going to create an instance of the adapter. And then I'm going to call adapter.find subreddit and params.subreddit ID. Sorry, it should be subreddit ID here. So we didn't see anything on our template, and that's because we actually changed the model format, and our template doesn't reflect that. So I'm going to open up the subreddit file. I'm going to get rid of this stuff. I'm going to create just a plain old unordered list, and I'm going to loop through using an each. And I know the format that Reddit sends back, and it starts with a data attribute, and then it has a children attribute. And then inside that, it has another data attribute that includes the title. So I'm just going to make a super simple template and hit save. As we can see here in our web browser, wow, we already have it showing the Reddit. So what if I went to our corgi, which is for the corgi dog enthusiast? Ah, cool, that's awesome. It just shows the new data right like there. Just to make it a little easier to navigate around, I'm going to create just a set of links that allows us to pick some of the subreddits that I like. Let's create a new file, and this is going to be a new route. And this one's actually going to be called application.js. So this one's actually going to be global to the entire application, and that's because I want to put these links in the header. So I'm going to say export default ember.route.extend, and I'm going to declare another model hook. And I'm just going to return a list of strings of the Reddits that I like. So I'm going to say pugs and corgis and aw. So, the best parts of Reddit, in my opinion, are the parts that are cute. So once I've just returned that list of things, I can open up our application handlebars file again. And I'm just going to create a loop through those items using the each helper that we just showed. And the way I'm going to do it is just like this, and I'm going to say this, which so if each is iterating through something, this refers to the item in the string. And we're just going to go like that. And now in the browser here, you can see that we have the links to the various things, although they don't actually link to anything. So I'm going to show you a new helper now, which is called link to, which call like a block, like the each helper. And I'm going to say link to subreddit this, and link to. Cool. So now if I look here, I can click pugs, I can click corgi, I can click aw, and it's just working. So it's kind of amazing when you think about it seemed like there was a lot of concepts there, but the amount of code we've actually written to provide this is mostly HTML. So I think that's really awesome. So the next thing I want to do is introduce the concept of a store. This will actually just make it so that we have to write even less code overall, although it'll be a little more code at first. If you recall, an adapter was a way to reach out somewhere and retrieve some data. And the store is going to be a common interface that exists above adapters that can do things like cache data and return model instances and stuff like that. Again, we'll get there, but that's the high-level view. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into the models directory, and I'm going to create a file called store.js. And this is going to just export another regular object, or an object type, I should say. And this is going to be our store. And our store is actually going to have a very similar API to our adapter, in that it's going to have a find method. And the find method is going to take a name and an ID. And what we want to do here is we want to return the adapter for the name and then call find on it. So that's one reason why we want to have the name everywhere, so that we can reuse this code. So recall the store here isn't called subreddit store. This store is going to be a global thing, so it should be able to look up any kind of adapter. So the way we're going to do that is I'm going to say var adapter equals this.container.lookup. And don't worry if this container stuff is new to you and you've never seen it. This is probably one of the only places you'll ever have to use it. So if you're curious, you can look it up in the API documentation. But if not, just copy and paste this and it should work fine. So I'm going to say lookup adapter plus name. And then I'm going to say return adapter.find name ID. What this is telling Ember is look up an adapter for the name I'm passing you. In our case, it'll probably be subreddit. And once you've found the adapter, call its find method, again with the name for debugging and useful purposes and the ID. Now we just have to tell Ember that this store exists. And this is probably the most complicated bit of code, but again, you can copy and paste it. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into the initializers directory, and we're going to say inject. We're going to create a new file called inject store. So we're going to create an initializer here, and the initializer is going to make our newly created store available in routes and controllers. So I don't want you to worry too much about the syntax here because it's not that important that you have this memorized. It's something you do very infrequently, and in fact, you can just copy and paste this. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to import our store from Ember Reddit models store. And then I'm going to export an object here. And the object is going to have two properties. One is a name, and I usually just call it the same thing as the file. And then it's going to export an initialize function with a container and app. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to call app.register with the name store main, and we're going to pass it our class. And that's saying we want to make something called, we want to make store available as store main. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say, let's inject store, let's inject into routes as a store property, an instance of store main. And then I'm going to do the same thing with controller. When I hit save here, if we go to our browser, everything looks the same as it did before. I mean, we haven't actually changed how the data is retrieved. But this is the really cool thing. If we go to the subreddit route, we can now remove all these lines. And if I hit save, and I refresh on my browser, wow, it's still working. So what happened there? Ember is smart enough to know that in your router, if you have a path called something underscore ID, and you call that and it doesn't have a model hook defined, it'll call that find method that we created on our store automatically with the ID that you passed it through. So that's really cool. Even cooler is that we can actually remove that route altogether. So I'm going to go ahead and do that because we no longer need it. And bam, the whole thing is just working. So there's one thing I don't like about this application, and it's if you look at the subreddit handlebars file, this is really ugly. This data children and data title. Like if you think about it, like the data we've retrieved from the server, like we want to make that available to our templates in a much simpler way. It shouldn't have to depend on the Reddit API. So that's one thing adapters are really great at. Like I said, adapters are meant to go to the server, and they're also supposed to convert that data into format that you can then use later on. So I'm going to open up our subreddit adapter, and I'm going to make some changes here. This call to Ajax here is returning a promise, and Ember loves promises. It's all about asynchronous data access and using promises as a way to avoid callback spaghetti and just like too much nested function calls. So when we call this, if we attach on a then method with result, I'm just going to break up this line here because it's getting a little long. So here I've chained a then to the Ajax call, and I've given it a function result. And what I return from here is going to be a transformation on the data that has occurred to the Ajax call. So if I say return result.children, or sorry, result.data.children, we can then go to our template, and we should just be able to say each. Bam, worked. So that's already better, but I still don't like that it has this nested data title thing in here. So I'm going to open up the adapter again, and what I'm going to do here, and it also has like actually a bunch of other attributes that we don't need. So I'm going to call map on it. What map does is, hopefully you're familiar with some functional programming, but it calls the method you pass to map on every element in the array. So I'm going to say return a new object, and the object is going to have, let's say, the ID of the child. It's going to have, let's get rid of this. It's going to have a title, which is cdata title. And then it's going to have the domain, because Reddit, they love showing the little domains. And then it's going to have the URL, which is cdata URL. So now our template isn't working, as we saw, but that's because this data is no longer required. So if I just say title, we're seeing the title again. Now let's actually add the domain by just adding, this is how they usually display it on Reddit. They put it in parentheses, and then that's working. And then finally, let's add the link. So I'm going to create an A tag, and I'm going to use the bind adder helper in Ember to say I want to bind the href tag to be the URL attribute. And here we go. Now our template has links, and I can click bunny cuddles with cat, and then look at that. That's adorable. So now that we've done that, I want to go ahead and create something really advanced, and that's our own identity map. If you're not familiar with what an identity map is, it's essentially a cache of database accesses, or I guess I shouldn't say database, I should say like RPC or API calls or whatever. The idea is that if you know the ID and the type of something, you can look in your cache instead of having to make an expensive I/O call. The reason we call it an identity map rather than just a cache is that it's also used to make sure that if two disparate places in your application request the same object by ID, that they actually are pointing to the same object in memory. And that just helps you prevent memory leaks, and it helps your application, your bindings work, and it just makes things work a lot nicer altogether. So I'm going to go into our file here called store, and I'm going to create a new variable called cache. And I'm just going to make it an empty object for now. Now, the way ES6 modules work is that if I don't export something, this variable is only going to be usable within this one file. And this is really useful for creating private data like this cache structure. So the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to say if there is a cache for this type of object, and there's a cache for this type of object and ID, then let's just go ahead and return the cache value. It's pretty simple, right? Just plain old JavaScript. Then what I have to do is I have to make sure that if we find something successfully, that we put it in the store. So I'm going to then use the same promise method that I did before. In this case, it's going to have a record. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say cache name equals cache name or an empty object. And what that's going to do is it's going to support the first time that an entry is put in the cache for a particular type. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say cache name ID equals the record we just found. And finally, I'm just going to return the record. So all this is doing is it's just saying, look in here. If I have it, give it back. If not, after I found it, make sure that you store it in the cache before returning it. And now, if we go to our application here, as I navigate to pugs, that's a little slow first time, pugs again, it's instant now because it has those things in the memory. So isn't that awesome? I think this is a testament to the power of Ember here that, you know, we've introduced a little complexity in the terms of these object structures that we're going to use, but then we can just make things so much faster as a result, and our application scales really well. Again, look at our template here. What could be simpler to give like a designer than something like this? It's very little embedded code compared to other languages, and it hides a lot of that complexity and makes your applications a lot easier to build. So anyway, thanks for watching this. I'm going to make the source code available so you can try it out yourself, and you can pick through what I did and send me pull requests and all that stuff. So thanks for watching.